Imagine a dusty frontier town at dusk, torches blazing in the square. A young ranch girl, Caitlin Moore, stands on a rickety stool with a noose around her neck, the hangman's rope tightening inch by inch, accused of rustling, surrounded by angry townsfolk chanting for her death. Her heart pounds in her ears just as the stool begins to wobble, and Caitlin braces for the end. A mysterious cowboy steps from the shadows brandishing a federal badge. He speaks with the calm authority of a man holding earth-shaking secrets. Secrets that just might save Caitlin from an unjust execution. If this moment already has you gripping the edge of your seat, stick around to hear the full story of betrayal, clandestine schemes, and a fierce determination that won't bow to corruption. There's a twist at every turn, culminating in a final showdown you can't afford to miss. Subscribe to our channel now so you never miss a single riveting tale in our growing library of frontier adventures. Caitlin Moore's world began and ended at the fences of the Moore Ranch in central Wyoming territory. From childhood, she had memorized every slope, every creek bend, every grove of cottonwoods where the cattle liked to wander. She woke each morning before dawn, saddling up her roan mare and trotting out to scan the herd with a practiced eye. Her father, Gideon Moore, had once worked this land with vigor, but age and arthritis had slowed him considerably. So for the past 3 years, Caitlin had taken up the mantle of ranch manager, ensuring the Moore brand, a stylized M, inside a circle, remained a symbol of quality beef in a changing West. At 19, Caitlin looked younger than her responsibility might suggest. Freckles dusted her cheeks from long days beneath the sun, and her wide-brimmed hat bore sweat stains that spoke of countless hours in the saddle. Yet her green eyes held resolve. Hardships had tested her, the loss of her mother to fever a decade prior, the slow decline of her father's health, and the financial uncertainties that plagued every small ranch struggling against larger conglomerates. Still, the Moores persevered. Caitlin maintained the ranch books by lamplight each evening, wrestling with the sobering truth that beef prices were dropping while supply costs soared. One spring morning, she had scarcely finished her circuits of the north pasture when she noticed fresh hoof prints near a section of the fence. They were scattered and strange, as if multiple riders had passed in the dead of night. Alarm prickled at her neck. Her routine count of the herd confirmed her fear. 8 head of prime cattle were missing. With urgency pounding in her veins, she rode back, her mare's hooves thudding across packed earth. Gideon was sitting in his usual spot on the porch, gnarled hands cradling a coffee mug. She dismounted and relayed the news. "Could be rustlers," Gideon said, brow furrowed. He had hoped they'd never face that scourge so close to home. "We'd better let the local marshal know." Caitlin agreed, though a hollow worry twisted in her gut. Rumors had circulated of a powerful land baron, Everett Holcomb, snapping up struggling ranches for pennies on the dollar. And then there was talk of a new railroad expansion. Might Holcomb be orchestrating thefts to drive families into desperation, forcing them to sell? She couldn't be sure, but anxiety clung like burrs to her mind. In town, she discovered a crowd gathered at the marshal's office. A group of men pinned a battered wanted poster to the notice board, accusing someone of rustling cattle with the Moore brand. Her eyes widened. The brand was indisputably the Moores, but the circumstances were baffling. The bystanders glared her way, muttering that Caitlin had been seen near stolen livestock. She tried to speak with Marshal Crayston, but he was busy listening to a slick-looking man in a black suit, who she would learn was Orrin Nichols, an agent claiming to represent Holcomb's trade consortium. Nichols insisted they had a witness prepared to testify that Caitlin herself had moved stolen cattle through a nearby canyon at dusk the previous day. Outrage boiled in her chest. She had never even set foot in that canyon at that hour. Yet gossip and suspicion spread faster than a prairie wildfire. The crowd's angry murmurs turned to ugly threats. "Rustlers belong at the end of a rope." Marshal Creighton, pressured by Nichols, ordered Caitlin arrested for rustling. Panic and disbelief warred in her mind. This is a setup, she realized too late. She was shoved into a cell while angry voices outside rose in volume, calling for frontier justice. The hours in the cramped jail cell passed in a surreal haze for Caitlin. From the barred window, she glimpsed passers-by scowling at her as though she were a branded criminal, unworthy of a fair hearing. Through the haze of humiliation, Caitlin's sense of injustice mounted. Everything about the accusations felt orchestrated. Nichols flaunted a so-called witness statement, naming her specifically as the culprit behind stolen cattle discovered with the Moore brand. Gideon Moore managed to visit her once before a mob formed in the streets. He pressed a comforting hand through the bars, voice trembling. "They're saying you've been rustling for months, Kate. That Holcomb's representative has proof some contrived bill of sale with your signature. None of it makes sense. It's lies, Caitlin whispered fiercely. Holcomb or his associates must have planted that evidence. They want us forced out, so we'll sell. Our ranch's creek access is too valuable. Gideon nodded, but the lines of worry on his face deepened. Marshal Creighton claims he'll hold a hearing tomorrow, yet Orrin Nichols is riling everyone up, talks of hangings. I fear they won't wait. That fear came true shortly before sundown. The clang of the jail door shattered Caitlin's grim reverie as men with torches dragged her outside. Shouts of rustler and thief struck her ears. She tried to resist, but they bound her wrists. The final blow was the sight of a rope draped over the thick branch of an ancient cottonwood in the town square. Faint evening light cast everything in crimson hues, turning the dust to ruddy gold. A hush fell as they forced her to stand atop a makeshift stool. Nichols, smirking from behind the crowd, watched with a satisfied gleam. People parted for him the way lesser predators yield to a bigger one. Caitlin's heart thudded, breath ragged. She was only 19, and here she stood, about to die for a crime she did not commit. The noose rasped against her neck. Terror and defiance churned within her. Marshal Creighton hovered near, uncertain. Perhaps he hadn't expected the mob to escalate so quickly, yet public outcry for frontier justice had become a monster beyond his control. Orrin Nichols spread his arms like a ringmaster, stepping forward. Caitlin Moore. The territory finds you guilty of rustling. Any last words? She tried to speak, but dryness and anger choked her. She coughed once, gazing at the ring of faces lit by torches. The stool wobbled underfoot. She closed her eyes, furious tears escaping. This can't be how it ends. Then against the hush of the mob, hoofbeats echoed. A single silhouette emerged at the edge of the torchlight, a figure mounted on a dark horse. The crowd stirred uncertain. The lone rider dismounted with deliberate calm. He wore a worn cavalry hat pulled low, obscuring his eyes. A revolver with a silver handle glinted at his hip. You might want to hold off on that hanging, he said in a steady baritone that cut through the tension. I've seen enough evidence to know this young woman is no rustler. Nichols turned, scowling. Who are you? The stranger stepped closer, letting the flickering light reveal the brass star pinned under his coat. Wyatt Hayes, special federal investigator, and I suspect the biggest criminals here aren't behind bars. A ripple of confusion swept the crowd. In that moment, Caitlin breathed again. Hope battling the suffocating rope. This stranger Hayes had arrived in her darkest moment. But would he truly save her, or was it already too late? Wyatt Hayes calmly approached the gallows, meeting the stunned glares of townsfolk who had braced for blood. Not a revelation. He tipped his hat slightly toward Marshal Creighton, who stood uncertainly near the noose. Marshal, you might want to release Ms. Moore, unless you fancy being complicit in murdering an innocent rancher. Orrin Nichols' eyes narrowed. You have a badge, but who sent you? We don't recognize your authority. This is territorial matter. Hayes' lips curved faintly. The federal government sees certain crimes like tampering with mail routes, interfering with land claims, or forging deeds as its concern. I've been tracking such infractions across the territory for months, and Caitlin Moore's arrest has the same rotten hallmark. He swept his gaze across the crowd, many shifting uncomfortably. In simpler words, if you hang her, you'll answer to Washington. Marshal Creighton, unnerved by the explicit threat, hesitated. But the tension in the square was thick. Nichols sneered. That might carry weight in a big city, but out here frontier law rules. And frontier law says rustlers hang. Hayes' expression hardened. Then let's show your frontier folks the real rustlers. Or do you prefer to keep your payments from Holcomb a secret? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Nichols stiffened, confirming that the stranger knew more than rumor. Reluctantly, Creighton signaled 2 deputies to remove the rope from Caitlin's neck. She stumbled off the stool, nearly collapsing with relief, her pulse thundering. Hayes grasped her arm gently to steady her. Some onlookers cursed in frustration. They'd come to see a hanging, not a debate, but a surprising number just looked relieved or confused, as though awakening from a feverish dream of vengeance. Freed from the noose, Caitlin confronted Nichols in the torchlit crowd. I've never stolen a single head of cattle in my life. My brand was forged, and someone is orchestrating the theft to frame me, she glanced at Hayes. And apparently I'm not the only victim, Nichols tried to bluster. You're a proven rustler. We found more branded cattle stashed miles away with an illegal bill of sale. A so-called witness saw you. Are you accusing an entire town of conspiring? Caitlin's voice rose. I am accusing Everett Holcomb of pressuring ranchers, forging evidence, and paying men to lie in court so he can swallow more land for his railroad deals. And I suspect you, Mr. Nichols, stand to gain from it. Is that about right? The crowd stirred again, unsettled. The West was full of tall tales, but something about Caitlin's fervor and Wyatt Hayes's presence lent weight to her claims. Hayes stepped forward. I have documents tying Holcomb to multiple forced foreclosures. Or would you rather I wave them around in front of the entire crowd? Nichols' face blanched momentarily. This is a farce. This so-called investigator has no standing. Marshal Creighton, do your job. But Creighton, seeing the changing tide, only murmured, I can't stop a federal agent from investigating. Let's handle this properly. Nichols, or we'll all pay for it. An uneasy hush fell, torches flickering in the dusty wind. Caitlin looked around at townsfolk who wouldn't meet her gaze, ashamed of how quickly they'd turned vigilante. Some stepped back altogether, muttering apologies. Nichols's men and uncertain hung at the edges, no longer bristling for a fight. Hayes exhaled. Take Ms. Moore back to the jail for her protection. I'll speak with each witness. If after reviewing all evidence we find her guilty, she can stand trial under due process. He surveyed the crowd. But if she's innocent, someone else is going to pay dearly for nearly murdering her tonight. That threat landed heavily. Marshal Creighton signaled a deputy to escort Caitlin. She followed, exhausted but alive mind, racing with new questions about Wyatt Hayes and the tenuous hold of justice in a lawless domain. The next morning found Caitlin in a different cell, this time with the door unlocked. Marshal Creighton claimed it was protective custody, an arrangement that appeased hot-headed locals while keeping her safe. She spent hours pacing the narrow space replaying the night's events. Hayes had disappeared at dawn, muttering about leads to chase. She wondered if he'd truly believe her or if she was simply another pawn in a bigger game. Late afternoon, the jailhouse door creaked open and a weary Hayes stepped in. His shoulders slumped, hat tilted over his brow. We have new intel, he said quietly, pulling a folded letter from his coat. Looked familiar. Caitlin examined the letter, shock seizing her. It bore a crudely forged signature, her own, plus references to stolen cattle. The exact details Nichols and Holcomb had used as evidence. The letter was found, Hayes explained, on a ranch a dozen miles away, pinned to a barn door by a knife. They're doubling down on framing you for additional theft, trying to sway any fence-sitters to believe you're behind a whole ring of rustlers. Anger coursed through her. They want everyone to see me as the territory's worst outlaw, so no one questions what Holcomb's actually doing. This is madness. Hayes gave a grim nod. Holcomb must be feeling cornered. That's when men like him grow most dangerous. The railroad contract is near finalization, and your ranch's water rights stand in his way. He'll do anything to break you. Then we have to gather undeniable proof, Caitlin insisted. Enough that even corrupt officials can't ignore it. Hayes took a seat on the rickety cot opposite her, folding his hands. Your father's ranch is prime. Holcomb needs that water for the railroad route. If he can't buy it, he'll sabotage it. And if smearing your name isn't enough, he might escalate to violence. We need to uncover every piece of paper, every bribe, every brand forgery that points to him and his cronies. But we must be careful. Holcomb has powerful allies. Caitlin squared her jaw. Powerful or not, they nearly hang me on a pack of lies. I won't rest until they're brought down. What's our next step? Hayes's eyes held a flicker of admiration. I'll do some digging in the land records, see if we can trace bribes or unusual sales. But we also need to check an alleged staging area for stolen cattle. My contact says there's a hidden corral near Box Canyon. If we can catch Holcomb's men in the act, that'd be the smoking gun Marshal Creighton called in from the office. Hayes, a telegram, for you, urgent. The lawman's voice wavered, hinting at bigger storms ahead. Caitlin watched Hayes depart again, resolve stiffening her spine. She might still be in protective custody, but she refused to be a bystander in her own exoneration. If a hidden corral existed, she'd help find it. The West might be harsh, but she'd learned its lessons well. Fight or perish. That following day, Caitlin and Hayes rode out at first light. The deputy who escorted Caitlin from the jail house, one of the few who'd quietly expressed doubt about her guilt, pretended not to notice, as Hayes guided her to a stable behind the building. They saddled fresh horses and slipped away while the town still slept. Frost clung to the tall grass as they followed a winding trail that led into rougher country. Hayes explained that in low tones that his telegram contained partial instructions from a federal contact named Darrow, who had tips about Holcomb's next move. Word is the stolen cattle are funneling to a secret corral near Box Canyon. Hayes said, we find it. We find the proof we need, Caitlin recalled, hearing rumors about that canyon. Rugged slopes, hidden gullies, perfect for outlaws. The chill in her bones came from more than the cool dawn air. She'd nearly been killed by a false narrative. Now she risked actual gunfire from real rustlers. Yet that risk also spurred her forward. If Holcomb was orchestrating a wide-scale conspiracy to drive out families and seize water rights every hour they delayed threatened more lives. They followed game trails across a ridge that overlooked vast plains. The sun rose behind them, painting the sky in stripes of orange and pink. Caitlin's breath caught at the natural beauty, so at odds with the ugliness of corruption below. She spotted wagon tracks converging near a stand of pines. Hayes dismounted to inspect them, his brow furrowed. These ruts are fresh, maybe a day old. Looks like multiple wagons plus horsemen. They are heading west, deeper into canyon territory. They pressed on. The path wound into a narrowing valley, shadows growing as the hills crowded closer. Partway, they tethered their horses among dense junipers, continuing on foot for stealth. Eventually, they crested a small rise, peering down into a bowl-shaped hollow. Her heart lurched at the sight. Dozens of cattle milled inside a hastily built corral. Even from here, she recognized brands belonging to various ranches across the region. None reading more, but that hardly mattered. If Holcomb was forging more brands, he could just as easily forge others to pit ranchers against each other. Looks like a big operation, Hayes murmured. Riders, too, counting at least 6 men. Sure enough, men in dusty coats patrolled the corral's perimeter. A rude shack stood at one edge with smoke curling from a flimsy stovepipe. Must be their base, Caitlin said, recalling the cameo of a witness once used against her. Could that man be among them, possibly? We need to see if they've got brand irons or documents. Hayes nodded, retrieving a small spyglass. After a moment of study, he offered it to her. Through the lens, she spotted brand irons propped near a fire ring. Her pulse quickened. They're fresh irons. They might be forging ranch brands right now. He put a hand on her shoulder gently. This is key evidence, but approaching unseen will be tricky. We can't just charge in guns blazing. They might kill the cattle or set fire to everything. A twig snapped behind them and both whirled, rifles raised. Another figure emerged, Leon Kingsley, a slick man wearing an Eastern suit that looked hopelessly out of place. You two have an awful knack for showing up where you're not wanted, he drawled. The corner of his mouth lifted in a predatory smile. Holcomb's quite eager to see you both out of the picture. Hayes shifted sideways, placing himself partially between Caitlin and Kingsley. Leon Kingsley, I presume. The railroad's enforcer. Kingsley's eyes narrowed. I prefer facilitator. The railroad needs open routes, minimal local interference. The old ways must yield to progress. Caitlin's anger flared. Your idea of progress nearly hanged me. Kingsley spread his hands in mock innocence. Just business. Miss Moore, my associates see you as an obstacle. That's all. When Caitlin aimed her rifle, he took a measured step back, both hands visible. Let's not be hasty. I've come alone as a courtesy. Perhaps we can find a compromise like you selling the ranch, or quietly leaving the rustlers below in the corral. Seemed unaware of this standoff. Hayes glanced that way, tension coiled in his frame. You've hurt too many families, Kingsley. We're bringing you in along with Holcomb. A flicker of annoyance crossed Kingsley's face, I see. Then I suppose I'll have to decline your courtesy. Before Caitlin could respond, he whistled sharply. The shack door below flung open and 4 men sprinted uphill with guns in hand. Scatter, Hayes hissed to Caitlin. Shots snapped overhead. They dove behind boulders, returning fire. The hidden corral had become a battleground, all while cattle bawled in confusion, and the morning's hush erupted into violent chaos. Gunfire cracked repeatedly, echoing off the canyon walls. Caitlin's heart thumped so loudly it seemed to drown out all other sounds. She flattened herself behind a slab of rock, reloading her rifle with trembling fingers. Across a narrow gap, Hayes fired with calm precision, each shot forcing the rustlers to keep their heads down. Leon Kingsley had vanished into the fray, presumably orchestrating his men. A bullet ricocheted close by, sending shards of stone into Caitlin's cheek. She grit her teeth, ignoring the sting. Focus, she reminded herself, channeling the drills Hayes had taught her. She poked the rifle barrel around the rock's edge, aimed at a shape behind scrub, and squeezed the trigger. The man yelped and rolled aside, gun clattering away. Adrenaline sang in her veins. This is for every rancher you framed. But the rustlers recovered quickly, laying down suppressive fire. The high ground gave Caitlin and Hayes an advantage, yet the outlaws had more men. Shots hammered the boulders, pelting them with debris. Another bullet grazed Hayes' arm, eliciting a hiss of pain. Nevertheless, he didn't waver, returning fire with steely determination. Meanwhile, chaos spilled toward the corral. Cattle spooked, crashing against makeshift fences, threatening to break them down. If they stampeded, both sides could be trampled. Caitlin cursed under her breath, hooking the strap of her rifle to scramble behind a bigger rock. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a rustler creeping wide, trying to flank them. She signaled Hayes with a quick hand gesture, and he nodded, shifting his angle to cover her. With that single second of covering fire, Caitlin dashed behind a leaning pine flanking the flanker. They nearly collided in a swirl of dust. The rustler, big and broad-shouldered, swung his revolver. Caitlin's heart lurched, no time to raise her rifle. Instead, she ducked, smashing the butt of the rifle into his midriff. He doubled over, and with a swift motion, she slammed it across his jaw. He collapsed unconscious, or worse. Gasping, she yanked his revolver away. Some distance away, Leon Kingsley's voice rose above the din. Furious, "Forget the corral, take them down." "Move up!" The outlaws regrouped, pressing forward in a wave. Caitlin saw 4 men advancing on Hayes' position, and her chest tightened. "He's pinned." With a deep breath, she dashed to the left, seeking a vantage point behind an outcrop. She spotted the men below, crouched behind a fallen trunk, focusing on all their fire on Hayes' boulder. She loaded the last rounds in her rifle, aiming carefully. "You can do this." One shot took down the nearest attacker, toppling him sideways. Another shot whizzed overhead. She fired again, striking the log and forcing them to scatter. Hayes, seizing the distraction, popped up and unleashed a volley that left them in disarray. In the fray, Kingsley cursed, retreating toward the shack. Caitlin and Hayes converged, breathing hard, exchanging quick glances. The gunfire tapered off as the rustlers realized they were outmaneuvered. 2 had surrendered, arms raised, stepping away from the corral to show they'd had enough. Others lay wounded or had fled. The corral gates rattled, battered by terrified cattle. Kingsley's holed up in that shack. Hayes panted, "We've got to finish this." "I'm with you," Caitlin said, wiping sweat from her brow. Every muscle ached. Her ears rang from the blast, but her resolve burned brighter. Holcomb's empire thrived on intimidation. This morning's fight proved that intimidation could be broken. They advanced on the shack slowly, rifles at the ready. Inside, a presence shifted. Then a single shot crashed, splintering the door. They dove aside. Kingsley's furious snarl followed. "You don't know who you're messing with. Holcomb controls half this territory." Caitlin pressed herself to the shack's outer wall, exchanging a tense look with Hayes. Enough was enough. "So do you want to burn the shack or risk going in?" she whispered. "No innocents inside," Hayes reasoned. "We can flush him out. Cover me." Caitlin circled to the back. Hayes kicked in the front door. 2 gunshots erupted. Silence. Then Hayes shouted, "Drop it!" Kingsley retorted with a final shot that ricocheted past Caitlin's ear. She lunged through the rear window glass, shredding her sleeves. The sudden move startled Kingsley. He spun, but Hayes struck, disarming him with a practiced blow. A second later, Caitlin aimed her rifle at his chest. He froze, eyes blazing with frustration. "Damn you both. Let's see how your progress holds up in federal court." Hayes answered, winded but triumphant. Caitlin exhaled relief, swirling with exhaustion. The corral, the rustlers. It was done. They had actual evidence, living witnesses, brand irons, and now Leon Kingsley in custody. Step by step, they were dismantling Holcomb's scheme. By the time they escorted Leon Kingsley and the captured rustlers into Thunder Creek, a stunned hush cloaked the town. Many still remembered the night they nearly lynched Caitlin. Now that same young woman rode in, flanked by a federal agent presenting real criminals to the law. Residents gathered on porches, trading uneasy glances. The tension was no less potent, but its target had shifted. Marshal Creighton, visibly conflicted, emerged from his office, Kingsley in custody. Good Lord. He motioned a deputy to collect statements from the subdued outlaws. "They're part of Holcomb's ring." "I take it," Caitlin and Hayes both nodded. "We found them branding stolen cattle in Box Canyon," she said, and Kingsley was giving orders. Kingsley, half sprawled in the dirt, spat dust from his mouth. "I want my lawyer. This is an outrage. I came for a peaceful negotiation." Hayes ignored that. "Marshal, secure him well. He'll try anything to weasel out and get a doctor for the wounded men." Creighton gave a curt nod, calling for medical help. Then his gaze flicked to Caitlin, "Miss Moore. I owe you an apology. You were telling the truth all along, and I let rumor and Nichols put a noose around your neck." She studied his worn face. "It's done. Just promise me you won't let Holcomb's money influence you again." He lowered his head. "You have my word." For a brief moment, Caitlin allowed herself to hope. With Nichols vanished, presumably having fled after the failed lynching, and Kingsley behind bars, Holcomb's empire might be tottering. But Hayes placed a cautionary hand on her shoulder. Holcomb himself is still free. He'll be more dangerous than ever, especially with these arrests. We must move quickly. They retreated to a makeshift war room, an empty storefront Crapeman offered them for planning. Gideon Moore joined them there, looking relieved but wary. Caitlin embraced him, the weight of fear lifting slightly from her heart. She recounted the canyon shootout. He ruffled her hair in fatherly pride and concern, praising her courage. Yet that fleeting warmth gave way to the cold reality that Holcomb was still at large. Spread across a large table were brand registrations, false documents, deposit records, and the newly seized corral irons, each item a puzzle piece showing Holcomb's strategy. He aimed to build a monopoly. Hayes explained to Gideon, tapping a letter from Holcomb's associate, drive out or buy out every ranch that stands in the railroad's proposed path. Secure water rights, then either sell the land at monstrous profit or control shipping tolls. With official blessings from certain crooked politicians, Caitlin traced her finger along a map pinned to the wall. My ranch is central, without Moore Creek. The railroad route has to run through tough terrain. That's why framing you for rustling was so crucial, Hayes added. If the entire territory believes you're a criminal, your father would be forced to relinquish the ranch, or you'd be hanged, removing you both as obstacles. But the plan failed. In part, Gideon said, voice grave, Holcomb likely has other resources. Money men loyal to him. Maybe a few corrupt judges left. He'll either flee or regroup. We can't let him slip away. A messenger boy arrived with a telegram. Hayes read it aloud. Federal Judge Montclair arrives in 3 days, prepared to hold an emergency hearing on Holcomb's practices. Expects full evidence, signed Agent Darrow. 3 days, Caitlin said. Her gaze met Hayes's. We must ensure Holcomb doesn't vanish or sabotage final proof, and we need to keep the entire territory from descending into chaos. Exactly, Hayes said. Craig-Kitten's men can guard Kingsley. Meanwhile, we lure Holcomb into a final misstep. That's how we'll corner him, Caitlin inhaled, scanning the strewn documents. We dangle bait act like the ranch is vulnerable. He can't resist trying one more time to finish us off or force a sale. When he comes, we catch him red-handed. A hush fell each, aware of the risk. Gideon pressed a hand to his daughter's shoulder. I've nearly lost you once, Kate. Promise me you'll be careful. She managed a tight smile. No safer place than near a federal agent with a quick draw. Right? She shot Hayes a challenging grin, and he tipped his hat in silent affirmation. The stage was set for the final confrontation with Holcomb, a showdown that would either secure justice or break them once and for all. Preparations for Holcomb's trap began under the cloak of normal ranch operations. Caitlin and Gideon resumed chores around Moore Ranch as though all were well, though they discreetly welcomed a few hand-picked local ranchers who'd offered help. One by one, they arrived late in the evening. Riders who refused to be bullied by Holcomb's empire any longer. Meanwhile, Hayes coordinated with Marshal Creighton to keep news of their plan from leaking. In the ranch house, maps and lanterns cluttered the dining table. Gideon insisted on wearing his old gun belt, even though his arthritic fingers struggled to manage the clasp. The knowledge that men like Nichols, or worse, might still lurk, gave him purpose. Caitlin tried to appear calm for his sake, but her heart fluttered whenever she replayed the moment she nearly died. Still, the looming face-off fueled her. By dusk of the second day, a quiet hush blanketed the ranch. They guessed Holcomb was close. A messenger from Thunder Creek hinted that Holcomb had visited the bank withdrawing large sums of money, perhaps final bribe money or a payoff to last-minute gunmen. The air felt electric with tension. As darkness settled, Caitlin and Hayes walked the perimeter, ensuring vantage points were manned. We'll keep lanterns low, Hayes reminded. Let them think we're asleep or unguarded. If Holcomb tries a nighttime raid, we catch him unprepared. He paused, scanning her face in the flicker of starlight. Sure you want to be out here? You've done enough. She turned a wry smile on him, recalling the day he taught her to draw faster, to shoot straighter. Let's not forget, I'm a deputy in training, or so you once suggested. If I can't stand by you now, when will I? His eyes glimmered with respect and he nodded, linking them in a partnership tempered by adversity. Close to midnight, the ranch was eerily quiet. Gideon dozed in a chair by the window rifle across his knees. Outside, a lone horse snorted softly in the corral. The sky was deep with stars. Caitlin listened to her own pulse, waiting. Then in the distance, faint hoofbeats. Not a random traveler. The pattern suggested a group carefully pacing themselves. She signaled Hayes, who snuffed out the lone lantern, plunging the living room into darkness. They slipped outside, crouching behind a haystack near the barn. Shadows against the moonlight revealed multiple riders spreading around the ranch yard. Caitlin counted at least 10 silhouettes. One separated from the group, a man whose bearings seemed unmistakably sure. By the moon's glow, she recognized Everett Holcomb. From descriptions, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a tailored coat incongruous with the dusty terrain, Holcomb lifted a hand and 5 men dismounted, firearms drawn. "This property changes hands tonight," he announced quietly. "Take the house secure, Gideon Moore. The daughter is dangerous, shoot if necessary." Caitlin's stomach clenched with anger. These intruders had come to seize her birthright, ruin her father and silence her. But they'd met an army of their own. Making ranchers they'd wronged allied with federal law. A single shot cracked the hush. One of Holcomb's men toppled a warning from a hidden vantage. Hayes's voice rumbled out, "Holcomb, in the name of the United States government, stand down. You're surrounded." For a moment, no one moved. Holcomb's men hesitated, scanning the darkness for muzzle flashes or silhouettes. The ranch yard had become a battlefield of shadows. Inside the house, Gideon jerked awake at the shot hobbling to the window. He peered out, rifle trembling in his grip. Caitlin pressed behind hay bales near the barn, steadied her breathing. She'd stowed the big rifle in favor of a lighter revolver, easier for close quarters if it came to that. Holcomb's voice barked low and tense. "Who's with you?" "Hayes, Nichols, Kingsley." He still didn't realize his associates were behind bars, or on the run. "I've got honest ranchers, a federal warrant, and enough men to match your hired guns," Hayes replied, stepping into partial view behind a fence post. "You tried to ruin Caitlin Moore. You ended up exposing your entire scheme instead. Lay down your arms, and no one else has to die." Holcomb spat in the dirt. "You're bluffing. Even if you have men, I doubt you can secure every inch of this place." He looked to his men. "We press the advantage. Do not let them keep that evidence." A flurry of gunfire erupted as Holcomb's outlaws opened up on the barn, the house and the corral trying to sow panic. The darkness lit with muzzle flashes. Caitlin pressed low, returning careful shots. She glimpsed a figure creeping along the barn's flank. She recognized him from a prior confrontation, a scar-faced rustler. She aimed, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. He dropped with a muffled cry weapon clattering away. Adrenaline soared through her veins. Others advanced from the opposite side only to encounter the waiting defenders, neighboring ranchers who'd quietly arrived hours earlier. Shots and shouts combined in a deafening crescendo. Sparks leapt from bullets striking the anvil outside the workshop, sending a metallic ring across the yard. Through it all, Holcomb stayed astride his horse, surveying the mayhem with an air of frustration. His entire plan hinged on overwhelming intimidation. Caitlin suspected he hadn't counted on a coordinated defense. Then a sharper crack boomed. Gideon fired from a second-floor window, narrowly missing Holcomb. The shot startled the horse, forcing Holcomb to circle away into deeper gloom. Hayes seized the moment, vaulting a low fence to close the distance. "Holcomb," he shouted, words cutting through the chaos. "You're done. We have your confessions, your ledgers, half your men in custody. Surrender." Holcomb wrenched his horse around. "You think some scribbles can bury me? I have the governor, judges, and backers from the east, killing. You won't weigh on me at all." He spurred the mount forward, raising his revolver. Hayes dove behind a water trough. Holcomb fired thrice, wood splintering, water spilling. Caitlin clenched her teeth. She needed a clearer shot to take Holcomb down. She sprinted from the barn to a dilapidated wagon providing partial cover. One of Holcomb's men spotted her firing wildly. The bullet nicked her forearm. Pain flared, but she pressed on. She had to get an angle on Holcomb. The yard was ablaze with muzzle flashes. Another volley from the defenders made half the outlaws break and flee. Holcomb realized the tide was turning. With a growl, he turned the horse, presumably to escape. Caitlin realized if he got away, he'd vanish into the territory or hide behind powerful allies. She steadied the revolver on the wagon's splintered rail, ignoring the throbbing in her arm. Holcomb galloped across open ground, half lowered in the saddle. She inhaled, aimed for the horse's flank, disabling the mount. Might be her best bet. One shot from behind jerked Holcomb upright. Hayes had emerged, taking a careful shot that grazed Holcomb's shoulder, toppling him from the horse. Caitlin seized that second, fired at the horse's hooves to keep it from trampling him or letting him mount again. The animal spooked and bolted off. Holcomb hit the ground in a dust cloud. Before he could scramble up, Hayes was on him, revolver aimed squarely at Holcomb's chest. "Don't move," Hayes ordered, voice dangerously quiet. Holcomb glared with hate, clutching his bleeding arm. "You'll regret this, the railroad. The territory's judges, everyone in power is on my side." Caitlin joined Hayes, panting, revolver trembling in her hand. "No, not anymore. The evidence stands. Your men are beaten, and you can't bribe your way out of a federal judge." A hush settled as the last shots died. Fallen men groaned, The living ones tossed down weapons, among them a battered deputy and two ranchers emerged from cover relief etched on their faces. They'd done it. Holcomb's empire had shattered under the weight of truth and well-prepared defiance. Morning dawned over the Moore Ranch, bathing the yard in gentle gold. The night's chaos had subsided into a strangely peaceful hush. Uniformed officers, federal men, assigned by Judge Montclair, moved about collecting statements, tending the wounded and finalizing arrests. Everett Holcomb, his arm bandaged and pride in tatters, had been marched away at dawn. He spat threats and accusations, but no one paid heed now. The hard evidence Caitlin and Hayes had meticulously gathered guaranteed he'd stand trial along with every official he'd bought. Caitlin, exhausted and bloodied, sat on a bench by the porch. Gideon hovered, fussing over her arm, which was wrapped in a fresh bandage. "You did me proud," he said thickly, eyes shining. "I just wish your mother could see how you carried on the family spirit." Caitlin pressed her uninjured hand over his. In that quiet gesture, she conveyed her gratitude for everything he'd taught her: strength, honesty, perseverance. Hayes approached with a small smile, removing his battered cavalry hat. "Judge Montclair has arrived earlier than planned. He wants to hold a hearing in Thunder Creek tomorrow. Gather all parties. We'll testify. Even the governor can't bury this." His eyes glinted with relief. Caitlin tried to rise. "Then we'd best prepare Holcomb's trial." He guided her back down gently. "Take a moment to breathe. Federal squads are handling the stragglers. You've done enough for one night?" Warmth fluttered in her chest at the concern in his voice. She recalled how he'd found her at the gallows, how he'd taught her to fight, how together they'd dismantled a grand conspiracy. In a territory where so many revered cold independence, they discovered the power of solidarity. Later, as the day wore on, Caitlin found herself strolling the ranch yard amid broken fences and scattered bullet casings. The damage was real but surmountable, and despite the bruises on her arm and spirit, she felt freer than ever. The malicious shadow of false charges had lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. Because of Holcomb's downfall, other ranchers would keep their land, and the railroad might now develop in an honest manner. Hayes joined her by the corral, arms crossed. "I asked the higher-ups about you know," he said, tone mild. "Mentioned how quick you adapted to federal procedures, how unstoppable you were in a fight." He withdrew a small, silver-embossed star from his vest. "They said if you're willing, they'd make you an official deputy with the new agency. We need folks who know the territory, who won't fold under pressure." Caitlin's breath caught. She'd never imagined leaving the ranch. But the last weeks had shown her a bigger world that needed safeguarding. She accepted the star. Heart pounding. "I'm honored. Let me talk to Pa. See if we can manage both." The ranch and more, Hayes smiled. "Take your time. The West will keep forging ahead and we'll keep it honest." They turned to watch the sun arc across a brightening sky. The ranch, battered but unbowed, lay open before them. Caitlin felt a little star in her palm, thinking of how precarious justice can be and how vital it was to preserve it. She recalled that day under the noose, the hush of the crowd, the sting of betrayal. Now that memory would serve to remind her, one person's courage, aided by loyal allies, can unravel the mightiest corruption. And so in that new dawn, Caitlin Moore and Wyatt Hayes stood side by side, forging a future where the territory's wide horizons promised possibility, not oppression. The next chapter would bring challenges, but they knew how to stand as equals, guns ready, hearts unafraid. Standing on the same gallows where everything nearly ended for her, Caitlin Moore can't help but marvel at how close despair and hope can be. From facing a rope at sundown to uncovering a conspiracy that saved countless families, her journey has redefined what courage means in the Old West. For me, her story is a reminder that even a single voice, backed by unwavering determination, can triumph over a legion of lies and intimidation. That brand new star on Caitlin's vest isn't just a badge. It's a beacon of renewal and justice for the entire territory. What did you think about Caitlin's showdown and the undercover secrets? Drop a comment to share your thoughts and reactions. And don't forget to subscribe to stay tuned for more stories that celebrate the grit, heart, and triumph of the frontier spirit.